All right, we are back. Welcome to the show. This is the Weekly Jargon. I'm Abel Perez.
Jose Rodriguez.
Rohi Zachariah.
All right, and today we are here another week. We are going to have some good conversation. I'm going to ask you guys a quick starter question before we jump into the main topic, which is national headlines that have been made. You're going to want to stick around for that. We're going to kind of chew around the most recent shooting. It was a 16-year-old that is now at home recovering, but was a victim of essentially violence. And we're going to kind of peel back some layers to see what the root cause there was and, just give some perspective on that, right? But first, we'll kind of, get calibrated here. I got a question, and shout out to B95, our partners over at the Fresno station there. They had a question up, and it was a man and a woman. They're married. And they were debating on who is providing more value when it comes to providing dinner, right? The man says, I work all day, I work hard for my money, and so when I take you out to dinner, that's just as special as you spending all this time making a home-cooked meal for me, right? And her argument was, of course, no, mine has more love, more effort, more energy, and so my meal is more valuable than you just simply taking me out to get Chinese food or whatever it may be. Both of you are married. What do you think?
It's past Valentine's Day, so we can go out on a limb here.
yeah.
I don't know. It's a good topic because it brings about, is it about the money or is it about the action? And I agree. I mean, I think that you can't take away from whether it be a mom or a dad that stays at home and takes care of the kids or makes the dinner and all that. I mean, there's a lot that it's still a job. It still goes into it. It can be debated if it's harder or not than the job the other person has making the money. But I would agree. I mean, I think it's equal. I mean, I don't think it's a better or worse. I think it's an equal part that it's part of that partnership that you're sharing into. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, I look at the value at home because it does take a lot of time and effort to try to prepare a meal. And I know that when my wife puts together a good dinner, I mean, she goes all out. So when I'm there and I'm eating, it's like, oh my God, this is really good. Versus me, yeah, I can go to any other fancy restaurant and spend the money, but I don't know how those hands prepared it. I know that when I order it, 15 minutes later, it's there. So that kind of tells you how fast it's prepared. And of course, if it's a steak, they're going to give it to you there. But I think there's probably more value when you're at home. I don't get me wrong that I enjoy when I can take my family or my wife out to dinner. And, I can say, with the hard-earned money, let's go and either have dinner here, celebrate something here. But at the end of the day, I mean, there's nothing like you look forward to that. I like the chile verde or the birria with some rice and beans on the side and tortillas. I mean, to be honest with you, you'll get me that way. So that's awesome. So
okay. Yeah. I think when I was listening to that, it was almost like there are two different arguments or two different things that like focal points, right? If we're talking about the quality of the meal, then surely you give greater appreciation to the efforts put in by the spouse, right? Now, even if they're a bad cook, right? Even if they're a bad cook and the food's technically not better, you could still appreciate all of the effort and preparation that went into it because we've all cooked meals, I'm sure. It's a lot sometimes, right? And the more elaborate, you mentioned birria, things like that, those take time. And it's almost a full day of preparation for that stuff, right? So if we're talking about just the meal, I think you do give the upper hand to the person who's at home cooking and taking on that responsibility. But I also think there are people that don't know how to cook, and maybe all they do know how to do is work, right? And so for them, going out to a restaurant symbolizes or represents all of those efforts. It's the fruits of their labor. It's let me take you out somewhere, fancy. Growing up, we didn't go to restaurants all the time. So for me, going to a restaurant is always a treat. It always makes me feel better about myself. And I almost got that sense that like that spouse didn't understand that. They didn't understand that like me planning or that person, the spouse who wants to go to a dinner, planning a dinner, taking you out, pulling out your wallet and saying, man, I could have made this for $30, but here I am spending 120, but that's their treat. That's their reward, So I don't know.
I'm sure it's appreciated on both ends. I think even if you go out to dinner, it's the fact that you're out, not having to work or put that effort to go there. And this goes both ways, because a lot of times, we assume that it may be a woman on the other end, but like you said, this could be a husband at home trying to create, a really great dinner for the spouse. And at the end of the day, I think they enjoy it. There's value in that, but you shouldn't take value away from the fact that, hey, like you said, I worked really hard. I want to take you out. Here we are. Boom. When I do that with my kids, believe it or not, it's not about going out to the restaurant. I told you this before in a previous show. It's about going out there with my family and bonding. And that kind of isolates us and puts us in a corner booth. And now you got 4 people looking at each other. And it kind of forces you in a way, because if you look back to the dinner table, is that how you eat dinner with your family? We've gotten away from it as much as we want to, but we all eat in different times. But when we're here, we're almost pretty much, we're forced to kind of start engaging. And if you do it more routinely, then I think it becomes more of a bonding deal. And that has a lot of value. So I don't mind doing that versus staying home and having dinner, because I know at home it's already also another routine that we all eat at different times.
Yeah. Rohi, does your family eat at the same time? You guys are kind of
No, we have an odd schedule. Yeah. I mean, we usually get home late. So we try to do at least once or twice a week where we, as my wife and kids, will have a family meal together, and then Sundays are our family day. So that's the guaranteed day. So
nice. Yeah, same here. We we have Vincent doing theater and Abel doing basketball all in the evenings, and so we're all over the place. And I think literally like maybe 2 days ago, we're sitting there eating dinner all together at the table, and my wife goes, wow, like we hadn't done this in like months, just because we've been all over the place. So yeah, I think there's a significance in that. You're right. Gathering, breaking bread as a family there for sure. All right. Well, anything else to add on that?
I think we've covered that.
Now, let's jump into the, I don't want to call it the nitty gritty, but it is kind of the nitty gritty. Making national headlines. You have the young man, Ralph Yarl. I hope I'm not butchering that name, but he was a victim of some violence, and many are calling it racial violence because he went to the wrong house, apparently, to pick up his siblings. And upon knocking on the door, he was met with a shot. The Andrew Lester, 85-year-old white male, shot through the glass window of the door and opens the door and then shoots him again in the head, apparently to make sure he was dead, right? And fortunately, Ralph he did not succumb to his injuries. He survived by some miracle, and he's actually recovering at home. So he, gets a second chance at life there. And so there's all kinds of different components to this. What are your guys' takes on this when you hear it? I mean, there's no real easy way to peel this back, or no layer that should go first. So let's just kind of dive in wherever you guys feel is fit.
So I'll take it from the CCW aspect and what we train and talk to guys about. Like in a lot of states, California not being one of them, you have this castle law rule that kicks in that says, yeah, basically somebody's on my property, I'm fearful of them, I do have the ability to defend myself. So where this story gets into those particulars is that, if that one shot was fired, the guy's on your porch, maybe he's banging on the door, this 84, 85-year-old feels scared. I mean, to some degree, he would have been potentially justified in that first shot. But when you open that door and now you proceed into it, this is where you cross that legal boundary, and now that's where it went from maybe justified to now you're going to potentially spend time in jail. And it's a hard topic because you want to bring about people's concerns nowadays is the home invasion. Like it happens every day all around us in Madera, everywhere. And California being that we don't have that castle law like they have probably in Texas and particularly probably Kansas where this happened, is that somebody can be in my home and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. And you talk about you coming home and, all right, there's some guy standing in your side your house. Can you shoot him? Can you not? In this particular, I mean, obviously, yeah. I mean, he stepped over that boundary, and that's where I think he's going to find himself in trouble. So,
Yeah,
I don't know. I mean,
I still, it's hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that somebody's outside, hasn't invaded your property, and you go out and you take a shot. Not only that, you walk outside and you take another shot.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's like anyone out there soliciting for solar, and I'm sure that's the thing now, right? I mean, think about it. I don't know, this guy maybe want to invade my property.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a badge on or something, but, you know, I think the wise thing to do is just, hey, what can I help you with?
Mm-hmm.
Right? But I think there's such a big gap there in age, you know, 16-year-old, 84-year-old. What eras did they grow up in? Mm-hmm. And what's happening around that community that you're seeing that's keeping you fearful of someone invading you? Is it something you heard across the country? So now you're having to defend yourself and shoot anybody that comes to your door, especially someone of the opposite race,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because these typically happen, you hear these make national news when it's a black and white crime,
Mm-hmm.
right? Typically black on black, you hardly ever hear that, brown on brown, but it's when a white person kills a black person. And gun violence being involved. And that's probably the bigger issue here, right? Is I don't know, to me it just seems like that was... you went overboard there in trying to make that. I don't know what point you were trying to make there. He was invading my property, even though you have that right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, was it? And that's the thing. I wasn't in his shoes, so I can't really speak to that. But was he fearful for his life because he was there to pick up his brother? Was that the story? See, so not having all those
and
details.
these are the kind of questions. I mean, that you bring about is okay. Where do you draw the line? Do you say that it's simply because he's outside that nothing happens? I mean, if this guy was beating on his door, I mean, maybe he thinks again it's his friend's house or whatever. He's there and he's like, "Hey, mother effers, open the door!" Or, "Hey, open! I'm here!
Yeah.
I'm here!" You know, at that point, would it be justified to say that this guy inside should be fearful? I mean, it sounds like he's trying to bust through his door.
Yeah.
You know, again, I really don't like the fact that it has to be the racial thing. Like, why? Like, let's, this country is all talking about, we're all one, we're all together, let's not divide. But then the same news article says, let's divide each other and say, look, hey, here's this white guy shooting this black guy. Let's make it that. What's it about?
Well, I think the reason why that comes about, because I don't think this makes any headlines if the response from the police would have been a little bit more, in line with what, probably should have been, where you're detaining this individual until a full investigation is conducted. And, I think there's a lot of, because that 85-year-old was released and allowed to leave, and seemingly no charges brought upon, then it's like, wait a minute, you guys are just going to let this go? It was a mistake. Oh, it was, he thought it was a threat, Whereas, if it was any one of us, who made that mistake, just because we're not old, if it was any one of us that made that mistake, we would be in handcuffs, or, you'd have the SWAT team approaching our house, because we're considered a threat because we're younger or whatever the case may be. So I think initially it's not a rage of, race, but it becomes that when you realize here's a victim who's a young black male, and another, 85-year-old white man who's getting away with essentially murder, right? Because at that time they didn't know if he was going to make it or not. And so that's where that frustration, I think, lies, and where you start saying, really? Like, how can that person get away with it? If that was me, I wouldn't get away with that. You guys would be all over me, And so that's where I agree with the accountability, where, we do have to hold agencies accountable for fairness. If we have laws, then they have to apply to everybody, right? And it shouldn't matter if you're an old guy. These eyes see it as a white guy. There's all these different genre or categories that this individual, Andrew Lester, fit into. But either way, you still have to abide by the same laws, right? And so I think that's where that that divide starts coming up where it's like, here we are again. I thought we were, over that.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's to each individual state and how their laws are, but to your point, I think that if there is a shooting and law says, hey, well, we have to do a full investigation before, typically, I know that I can speak for California, as if you're in a shooting, regardless, I think through your class, we learned that, hey, be prepared to be arrested because you fatally shot someone, and now you'll have to go through the court system, prosecutor, whether they found you guilty or not, but there's a process. But to go in, and I think released, I think that's what really causes an uproar is where is the justice? Where is the process of due process of going through the channels of the law? Full investigation. Did we do this in a malice way? Did we do this with intention?
Let me pose it this way. Let's imagine the guy's front door was unlocked. And this kid was able to just, because he's there to pick up, just open the door and walks in the home. Would you guys feel in the same way saying that now does that make it justified because he's inside the home for some reason, like he was able to get inside? Or do you still feel that, like the news is portraying, that it's still a case of murder?
I think in that, scenario, just for the fun of doing scenarios, again, the CCW class tells you, you stop the threat. For one, your life has to be in danger.
Correct.
And then you stop the threat. And if he was to walk into the home, for one, the investigation, assuming they had the same laws as California, Andrew would have been found, guilty or in violation of that because this individual didn't have anything that posed a threat to him, right? Now, he could have said, well, he lunged at me, and then it's a he said, she said sort of thing, which is understandable. Okay, so then you shot him, right? But where did the second shot come from, right? When you stood over him, aimed at his head, and you shot again, right? And so I'm going to be I would be held accountable to that investigation. I would have to be answered to those questions. And so I would expect, this guy to be, asked those same questions as well. And, was all that justified? Was all that necessary? Right. But anybody in my house, because I have children and because I have a wife, I'm the protector of my home. If somebody is in my house that I don't know, I can only expect that they're there to do, cause trouble. And I will take action accordingly, but I do understand that there's consequences, right? And I think it's different if they're actually attacking me. Maybe you do, you get a shot off and you back them off, and your adrenaline kicks in. You probably do take a couple more shots to make sure that they're done threatening you. But that's kind of the hypotheticals there. But I think ultimately, sticking to those principles, we have those gun laws for a reason, or those rules of engagement for a reason, and it's for these scenarios right here.
One of the things that maybe a question I'll pose to you is that just the fact that he's 84 years old, it kind of tells me the era that he grew up in, right? We're talking, this guy was probably born in the 40s, grew up in the 50s. There was a lot of stuff going on throughout that time with civil rights, a lot of segregation. There were still colored restrooms and what have you. So in Kansas City, I'm not sure if that was the area where he was born. I don't have all those details, but I'm just trying to, again, put a scenario out there. What generation and what era did this guy grow up in? And was there any of that involved in the way his feeling was towards maybe someone of color, right? I mean, you got to look at it this way. My grandparents, when I talked to them, we just had different views of looking at the world, but they came from a different era. So someone in this age group, what was going through their head when they saw someone outside out there? I mean, what was it? The news? Was it the media feeding you this fear, this hate, or something? I don't want to politicize it, but there may be something out there, underlying conditions that we don't know, that potentially drove this guy to say, well, shit, man, I have a gun for a reason, and goddamn, this guy's not going to come in my house and I'm going to shoot. Yeah. We don't know the other story. If, like you said, maybe he was banging to a point where it may have made him feel threatened. But I'm just thinking of that era and in that what was happening around how did he grow up? What was his deal? And maybe you find out this guy was probably someone that was very fearful of blacks.
Yeah.
Maybe fearful of, I don't know Kansas City. I don't know if Kansas City has a high crime rate.
I'm sure that, yeah.
You know, that's another factor that we haven't really put on the table. But if that's the case, Kansas City's known for a big homicide, you know, or invasions, like you said, then shit, I'm going to carry a gun too. And I'm going to be fearful for my life every time someone comes around or I hear drive-bys or something, right? I mean, it's really hard to put that. But I guess I'm kind of curious to know what era.
Obviously the media is going to, you know, provide fabrication on each end, right, to everything. And so right now what you hear is, you know, Ralph Yarl, young man, kid, right? They're portraying he's a youth, right? He's a kid essentially.
Innocent.
He's 16 years old, under 18, all this stuff. But a 16-year-old doesn't look like a 16-year-old sometimes, you know. And my 13-year-old is only an inch shorter than I, you know. And so in those situations, it could be hard. It's not like I'm looking at a Girl Scout, you know, selling cookies to me. You know, she's this tall, and you know, I could see, you know, whatever. If you just see this, you know, big figure, I don't even know how tall the guy is or anything like that, but I would assume that he's at least normal man size, right? Because I mean, the average height for a man is 5'8", and so if you're 16-year-old, not uncommon for a 16-year-old to be 5'8", but anyway, my point is, it's hard to decipher, okay, is that a kid? Is that an adult? Is it a threat, right? And so you're kind of in that moment, and I'm just kind of playing devil's advocate right here, trying to figure out, like, you know, what was going on in Andrew's head at that time. You know, it's, boom, somebody's banging on my door. I look out, whoa, that guy's bigger than me because I'm a little frail 85-year-old man. Mm-hmm. Now I feel like my life's in danger, right? So I think the why you shot, you know, that's almost irrelevant, because I'm a big believer that we're all given free will, and people sometimes just do evil stuff, and there's nothing you could do, no policy, nothing, no spiritual, nothing that you could possibly do to prevent somebody from doing craziness, right? And so it's the actions that we take after that make all the difference. And I think I continue to think the uproar was based off of the response, right? Mm-hmm. I don't want to see this get swept under the rug. I don't want to see this Andrew Lester go back home and just keep sitting on his porch waiting for the next kid to come and, you know, step onto his property, right? Mm-hmm. Or I don't want people thinking in these streets here in Kansas City, I don't want them thinking that that action was justified, and every person that comes on your property, you can shoot and get away with it, right? Yeah. You have to send that message. But I'm going to turn the question back on you guys, and talking about, gun laws, is we take away driver's license from old people. At what point do we find them unfit for, being responsible with the gun? Mm-hmm. Was Andrew a veteran? I don't know. Was he, does he have PTSD from, seeing grandpa do certain things, or, look at black people a certain way. And so now he, those memories are starting to trigger, and his wires are getting crossed. And maybe it was a rage of racism. Not that he may have not lived his whole life as a racist, but it's, things happen upstairs when you get old, right? But do we start monitoring that for older people and their ability to carry guns?
Well, if you want to hit that one.
I can just try to say my opinion is that, whatever the truth may be, the media will certainly spin it in favor of what the behavior they want from it, right? If they want us to believe that this is what really took place, and they're going to do everything in that power to try to just amplify the scenario, amplify how this came about this way, unjustifiable and what have you. And, then there's going to be someone supporting the other person, right? Because there's gun laws, gun rights, and what have you. But at the end of the day, to your question, I mean, what would happen? I'll throw another. What would have happened if there wasn't any guns? If you had strict guns and there wasn't a gun involved? You think you would have had somebody invaded the property? Or do you think somebody would have just said, hey, no, they're not here, you got the wrong address, and he walks away without any injury? So removing the gun from the situation.
Yeah.
I mean that's the argument that you'll have with those that are pro guns and those that are against the guns. So for me, I think it's more of a, I mean, it's a very, to your point about the older people, it's hard to say that because then we'd be discriminating based on age, and they too have rights. We, not too far from the future, will have rights, right? And we want to make sure that we're careful how we do that. So I can't say that he wasn't all in his right head. We don't know the details, but at what point do you start? At what point do you draw a line and say, well, people after the age of 80 should not own guns?
Well, I'll put it this way. And I know, and I like when people start using driving. Driving is always my go-to to give examples when it comes to guns. But your example, like we take away licenses from old people,
We do?
well, that's the thing. So for one, driving is not a right. And I think most Americans get that confused in thinking that driving is a right. It's a privilege. So to remove somebody's license or to have barriers of who can drive and who can't is because it's a privilege to be on the road and not a right. DMV is really very reluctant to actually pull licenses even from old people because the necessity for them to drive.
I don't want to interrupt you,
Yeah.
but you said a privilege. If the Constitution reads correctly and what just took place not too long ago in 2008, it's that the right of the man to bear arms.
No, I'm talking to drive.
Okay,
To drive.
well, I think
No,
you were
no.
making that comparison,
No,
and
but I'm
I
saying-
thought you were leading to that. I just
No,
want to make
no.
sure.
So to drive there is no right. There is no constitutional right anywhere that says I have the right to a driver's license. That's why you can be denied it. That's why you can go your entire life without it and not be able to have it. But even saying that, DMV will treat it as a right because as you get it and you get old, they're reluctant to take it away. That's the point there. The Second Amendment is among many rights that you have. So when you say at some age you lose a right, what other rights do you lose at an age? Do you lose your First Amendment right because you're 85? Do you lose your third, fourth, fifth? What other rights are you losing because of your age? None. That's why the gun thing is always a bit frustrating to talk about because it's like, that's the one among all of them that they're like, well, we can take it away. You can take it away. So you can take away my First Amendment right? Tell me what action I do that says I lose my First Amendment. There is none. So how can the one right after that, it's like, well, if you do this, we take it away, and if you're this thing, we take it away, and this thing, we take it away. The other thing is, and I like when Abel says the word danger because that means you live in California, you were taught by CCW in California. In other states, it's what we call it's the F word. It's called fear. That's why in Florida, when Mark Zimmerman shot that black kid, he was able to be found justified because in Florida, fear is the only criteria necessary. He doesn't have to have a gun or a knife. He just has to prove to the courts that when I shot this person, I was in fear of my life. Now, Kansas, I would assume, is going to follow the same direction. They're going to say that in every regard, this 85-year-old man just has to show that he was scared of this kid, and he will be found justified. Again, where he went wrong was the amount of force used. And that's where when I explain these people, when they take my class, that this is a classic example of you were fine and now you're not. Because you fired the first shot, it probably would have been found okay. You went too far and now you're going to jail. Okay. Now, the other part of that is like, why did they do this? Why did they arrest him? Why didn't they keep him? All this. Well, that's the court system. They have to take all the evidence that's there and they have to rule on it. And again, they're probably looking at it in a way that says, well, this guy's 85. We're really going to put him in jail. He's probably got not much life left. That's, the only thing I can think at this point of why they didn't really handcuff him and throw him away. What I think is going to be scarier is when we start looking at, not this guy, because being his age, I doubt he uses social media very much. He probably doesn't have a very much digital presence. But if this is like a 60, 65-year-old or younger, there's probably that digital presence that this racial thing is going to kick in. They're going to go, okay, let's look at his Facebook. Does he talk about black people? Does he have any hate? Does he have any of these words that would give us now more evidence to show like it was a hate crime? Mm-hmm. Because none of this, I would assume, exists, because there's probably no video, because he's probably, again, I'm assuming all these things, that there's not a Ring camera on his front door, and he's not, live streaming every day of his life, that there was really more just, circumstantial evidence of like, there's a shot kid, there's a guy with a gun, but because this person didn't die, he's afforded the ability to now speak his side of the story, which is what the news is going to pick up, and he's going to say, "Hey, I was at the wrong house." How do we know that? What evidence has they presented that says here's the text message he wrote? It's always going to come across in his favor until it doesn't. So
It's funny you say that because, I'm going to bring a different example, not so much with guns, but you said, 85 years old, doesn't got much life left. The court systems, I don't know the police officers, I don't know the makeup of that police department. But I'm assuming, they look at him and they go, this guy reminds me of my grandfather, therefore let's let him go. Yeah. He's going to be okay. Well, let's change the scenario. What if that person was black, shot a white kid? Do you think he would have the same treatment and say, we're going to let him go because he's 85 years old? Do you think that he would be out already? I mean, that's the question. You have to turn that around and see, wow, and where have I seen those scenarios? And what other cases have I seen that? And that's where you go back to. You back to case law. We go back to certain scenarios. Well, this same exact thing happened where this person shot this guy, but yet he had to go through all this process, and they made an example.
But that's law, guys. I mean, that's why again you take so much offense to that. But that is the legal system. There are two systems, and I don't agree with them. But I'm just trying to tell you that is
okay.
The
So
law.
socially,
that's how it works.
In the social norm, that's what people are seeing. That's why there's such a big uproar because, regardless of the law, maybe the law doesn't fit to today's principles, today's actions that take place. They may have took action back in the 1950s and 40s when hanging a person was good. Mm-hmm. Hey, no worries, you just hung a black person. Yeah. That's normal here in this side of town, boy. You know what I'm saying? Stuff like that. That's not right anymore. Mm-hmm. Something has to change, and that's where I think people go wrong with that thought process. Is that no, you have to be. You have to provide justice for all. It doesn't say for certain people. It's justice for all. That's what I believe in, and that's kind of why I pledge to the flag every time I'm out there. Is because it's not just justice for a certain individual, a certain class of people. It's justice for all. At least that's what we want to believe. And if that's the case, and it doesn't align, it doesn't correlate.
But I'm saying in this case, I feel that the reason why it probably was handled initially the way it was is again because. I'm assuming because of nothing really being released that there's no evidence beyond just what is said. There's probably no video. There's probably no audio. So when you look at it, and you got to understand, okay, these cops, they come in, they gather this, and, well, we don't have anything. We have this guy saying, well, he was scared because his kid's at the door, and this kid that's saying, well, I was at the wrong house. That's not enough evidence to prosecute yet. So they can't just keep them. They have so much time to keep them, even if they wanted to, before they have to have something to go on. Doesn't mean they can't go back like they're going to do now and rearrest them if they do find that evidence. But you can't just, all right, we're going to arrest you. It doesn't work like that. You can't just arrest people and keep them forever until we find the evidence we want. That's what I'm saying. Like, I think the news is propagating this fact of like, yes, it's coming across as it was too easy. We should have held this guy a little longer, but you can't hold him forever. This happens to everybody. We arrest you, we pull you in, we question you, and you send him out. Same thing happened just down your street, Walmart. When we were talking about it with the DA, is that this girl shot the guy. It's very questionable whether or not it would be considered justified or not. They bring him in. They arrest her, but they do the questioning and they let her go, and then they bring her in for more questioning, but she's not in jail. And if at some point there wasn't evidence that was brought that she should be, they're going to go and arrest her.
There was witnesses and there was video. I think that they were able to review and be able to see how
but this was just very questionable.
But
whether or not
they did a due process. They went through the process of investigating the actual event. Here, I think what took place is that we took him to there, we asked him a question, we released him. Where was the investigation? Right, and I think that's why people are in uproar because they want to know, hey, did you follow the system like you would if it was the opposite? Yeah, that's kind of, and that's always the assumption is would you have done the same had it been the other opposite race? Sure, the opposite race, right? That I think because in many cases we've seen it. Yeah, and that I think people have the right to feel that way, regardless of media spinning out of control or not. I think it's just, is it humane for you to shoot somebody? Walk outside and shoot him again.
No,
and then apart from that, you come out to the station and they let you out.
But,
I
but
think
my question
that's-
is if he only shot once, what would you say?
Again, we don't know the situation.
No, but just
Right?
based on what you know, that's my question. Is
Yeah.
do you feel his first shot?
Again,
We're just here. We're not in the
Yeah.
jury. We'll never be called in. You
Yeah.
think it was justified?
Well, I think that if the first shot was taken, he takes his shot. You have your castle law, like he said, so he's justified there. He takes his shot, opens the door, turns on the porch light, is on the phone with police, sees that the guy doesn't have any guns or anything. He's probably bleeding out right there on the floor, and no longer a threat to him, or no longer providing fear for him, to him. Then he calls the police. They come, they get him. In this case, he didn't die, even with the second shot. So in this case right here, we probably never even hear about it. It was a mistake, deemed an honest mistake. Kid lives, very fortunate. Now, now you might have some people saying, well, let's review this castle law because, this kind of got out of hand right here, right? But it's certainly under wraps. But because of the nature of it, we have, this guy saying, boom, open my door. Now I'm going to go execution style, aim in cold blood. Now, I mean, that takes a lot for somebody to do that. Look down at somebody who and shoot at them again, right? I mean, that takes a lot out of somebody, and I think that needs to be taken into consideration, and it has been. But the thing about it is just the history behind certain people not being held accountable or held to those same standards or part of that same process. And I think that's what Jose was alluding to. And because there has to be that accountability of, are you sure? Are you going to try this correctly? Right. And it may not, the media may not be, oh my God, you're doing it again. And I haven't heard anything too negative about the police, no riots against the police, defund that police. It's just, we want to make sure that you're gonna go through with this. We want to make sure that you're gonna do a complete investigation, find this guy in the wrong, and charge him because based off of what we have, and there is evidence of. I think I'm assuming they got it through text messages, but there is evidence that shows the address where he was supposed to go, and then his actual address, and it was something like 110 East Street versus East 110th Street, right? It was something twisted just like that, but very. So because they have that, I'm assuming that they've already justified why the kid was there knocking at that door, which it was that's a mistake, And so anyway, but I think that it's just the accountability piece, for that police department, that agency. They have their process, right? They have their process. Everybody's innocent till proven guilty, sort of thing. This guy's 85. We don't find him a flight risk and all that stuff, right? Let's let him go home while we conduct this investigation. The kid's still alive. Let's see if he wakes up. Let's see if we can get some more information off of him, right? But let's kind of put this file and put it at the corner of our desk, and we'll get back to it, right? And I kind of think about that scenario as like when we're here at work, right? I have a client and they're looking for some numbers, and I'm hey, it's going to take me some time to do that. I'll get to that on the phone. Yeah, give me an hour and let me get you those numbers for you. Okay, great. But if another client walks in and says, "Hey, Abel, I need these numbers," right? And they're there at my door essentially, or inside my office, I'm going to say, "Okay, come in. I'm going to get to it immediately," right? And I think that's where that holding accountable of the court system in that area is coming from. Like that's where like kind of like the media and all these advocates are pushing for. It's like prioritize this and make sure that you're addressing it now. Don't push it off to the side. Don't wait. Like let's get some answers as quickly as we possibly can. Right?
As you would, had it been the opposite end. That's what I'm trying to get at. Is that as much as you don't want to get this politicized. It is because the tension and the history that exists in America, at least from the founding days, is that there's been this tension between whites and blacks a lot more than any other race right here, right? And that's huge right there. So when an incident of this nature happens, it's very probable that you're going to have these these uproars or these activists, making big roars, because it's always been that case. I mean, that's been what we've. You go back to the 1800s, prior to the Civil War. You come to the 1900s. There's always been a struggle to try to be equal, and sometimes you have to walk on eggshells, because depending on the area that you're in, you don't want to have an uproar coming from the opposite end either, because if you really go hard here, wow, I don't think that was right. I think he defended himself. You're going to have this group of people also. So you have to kind of balance that out. And I don't know if that's what the court system does. Say, who are the people that you're serving, right? Are you looking at a majority of people, minority of people? And the history has taught us one thing, is that this isn't something that's very rare. It's very common, and it happens quite often. And I think people are tired of it. They want to treat us equally. And I think that's why, to Abel's point, is that you're seeing a lot of media coverage, because they want to know that incidents like that don't go unheard of and don't go without justice.
No, I don't think that's quite the case. It's a gun and it's a shooting, and that's always the first easiest topic. But then you add racial, then it's for sure going to be a headliner. Again, the hard part is, and like I told you when we talked about the last shooting, is that it's tough to jump into these things without more stuff. Because again, what's typical with something like this is they're going to go, just like they've already done with this kid, they're going to go put you his Sunday's best photo. And you say, look at this kid. He's just innocent. Is that what he looked like when he was at his door? Probably not. Is there a history of this guy like shooting people? No. Is there a history of him having violence against blacks? Okay. But if there's not, then you have to say that there was something there that night that sparked this. Because if this kid's in a Sunday best and he's just looking all, hey, I'm just here to pick up my brothers, and the guy shoots him out of nowhere, the stories don't make sense. And that's where people, they don't have that, they can't process that. They just see innocent kid, white guy, he's old, he just shoots him. No, there's always more to that. And I guarantee you, like I've told you in the last ones, as soon as that surfaces, whether it be through some kind of video from next door neighbor or across the street, or more evidence that comes out, I'm always going to be willing to bet that there's going to come out something that it's not what you think. Just like I said, the last shooting at the school, as soon as it came out, this guy's a girl, whatever, is a trans, and there's this whole thing about like, aren't they supposed to be like the people we're fighting for? And they kill the story off. This person had mental illness, but kill the story off. I just have that gut feeling that this is going to be the same case. Like, this is not going to be what we're being told right now, which it's not going to be this innocent kid at the wrong house and just some white guy shooting him by accident or on purpose, I guess you would say.
Well, we'll have to follow up on that one. We'll have to see what the details bring out in this whole event. But no, right now, I think based on what we're hearing and based on what we're seeing is that, hey, this seems...
It's true.
I mean, I think articles are starting to say that there was a racial component in it, right? And I mean, obviously...
But where? Show me the evidence.
Well, again...
Besides the fact that there's different... I mean, that's what I'm trying to tell you is, besides the news just stating the obvious, a white kid and a black or white guy, where's the obvious?
This is generational, Rohi, and I think that's why I brought it history. Look,
I know.
You wanted to see evidence, right? And I'm just trying... I'm gonna go extreme, but I'm not gonna do it in that fashion. But let me just kind of paint a picture of what's inside some folks' mind, right? Okay, a hanging that took place in 1930 or 1940. That was your evidence. Mm-hmm. Was it justifiable? A lynching, was it justifiable? So you can start imagining how that starts growing in the back of you here. Those type of sentiments or resentment you have when something like this happens. Mm-hmm. That brings back those old ones, and it always continues because you've had that history in the back of you. So when someone of this race happens to commit a crime or happens to shoot someone of this race, it brings back that same resentment that exists historically. Yeah. And back then, someone might have said, well, they probably deserved it. Really? I mean, that's kind of the question that
you can paint that, but what I'm saying is like this guy has friends.
I'm not saying that's
people
the case that happened. I'm just saying if you paint the picture in that way, this is what's coming up in these communities is that they see this over and over and over, and essentially at some point you can't get away from that. That becomes a first trigger point. Is that there's trauma, generational trauma.
What I'm saying is that with stories like this, if it was there and it was that evident, the news guys would have gone to the next door neighbors on each side and said, "Does this guy ever make comments of black people?" And I guarantee they've asked that question.
Yeah.
They probably go, "No." They're not getting that answer you want,
Yeah.
and
So-
that's why you're not seeing it.
But
'cause it's not
the
there.
uproar isn't like the uproar isn't is Andrew, white people are racist. White people are still racist. That's not the uproar. It's
It's how it's prosecuted.
it's because he's white, he gets to go home later that day.
But that's what I'm saying. It's not. It's
But that's what
what's
happened.
being portrayed.
But that's what happened though. You can't say it's not because that's literally what happened.
But that's what I'm trying to tell you. You had non-whites do the same shooting in Madera, and the same thing happened. They bring them in, they question them, and they
yeah,
send
but
them back home.
that was a physical fight with guys getting stabbed with a knife, and so the victim getting stabbed, their spouse comes out and starts shooting. So I mean that's totally different context. But the thing is like it's not like we're not talking. And is there still racism in America? Is our system is it equal? Is it fair? Right? And I think that's more of the accountability piece that I've been hearing from media outlets and from different sources. It's like we cannot continue to allow things to get swept under the rug, right? And we have to have justice for this, right? And just because it's a black boy doesn't mean his life isn't as significant as a white Girl Scout, right? Who got shot. Same, if somebody's on your property knocking on your door, and again, we don't know the context, we don't know the justification, all that is to be determined. But what we do know is that this happened, and we just want to make sure that it's not being like we're not passive about it. We want to make sure that we're engaging. It is a concern. We do care about this. It isn't allowed, but. So I think that there's two different things right there where it's not so much like, was Andrew Yates, was he justified in the shooting and all this stuff? All that's to come. Mm-hmm. All that will be investigated. But I think the roar is just let's hold accountable the people that were involved, the person who shot. We'll get the answers. We'll get answers, but we want you guys to know that charges have been filed because. Yeah, but yet everybody's innocent until proven guilty, right? Charges filed, innocent until proven guilty. He'll go to trial, just like we tell everybody else who gets a concealed carry weapon that's what's going to happen to you guys. But my biggest question as we move forward from this is the world is so tiny now, right? The country is so tiny. Where before that wasn't the case. You hear don't go to Alabama, don't go to certain parts of the South, right? Because they do things different, right? Now we know about the way all different parts do it. We know their laws, we know their whatever they got going on over there, right? Yeah. As this world gets smaller and smaller, do we still feel like a country can be united when they have states with different laws that apply to them? Why should the same scenario in 3 states over get no years in jail, but because I'm in California, I'm going to get 10 years in jail? Why is that okay, right?
Yeah.
Why are felonies for life in California and not in other states?
Yeah, and so and good or bad, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I should be in jail for 10 years, and maybe that guy should too. But because he's in another state, he gets off easy. Or is that getting off correctly, and I'm getting off harshly, right? So where do you guys see the future of that? I mean, I feel like the media makes it really hard for individual states to continue to rule their own laws, right?
Well, I think part of the Constitution was, to try to cover this blanket over all states of the United States. But then you had the Bill of Rights. And I think this is where representation for each state, whether you're a senator, a governor, and or a House of Representative, you advocate for your state laws. And it's to the interest of that state to try to make and define its own laws that are beneficial to the residents of those states. And I think that's where you have issues. You don't have uniformity across the U.S. You have different states with different laws, different taxes, different things,
Yep.
right? So obviously people are going to look for where more of their values are represented, and that's where they want to be. California seems to have a very unique way of looking at things, very social, liberal type of government, But yet you go to like Florida or you go to Texas or you go to these areas at the South, and they're not going to be aligning in those areas. And that's where, people have a right, according to them, is to go out and live and prosper and live with those core values that represent them. And most of the times, it could be a social class, not so much a racial class, but predominantly you start seeing that people that reside in those states are probably people of the same culture, same class, and sometimes same race. It's still somewhat it's ingrained in our government, in our courts, in our legislative bodies to do that in a way. We don't see it, but if you look at the numbers, it's like, you see it from 1,000 miles up top, and then you start seeing the herds, and you say, okay, well, shoot, why is it that so many people out here with this same culture and same class, and then you have all these over here confined into these little areas, yet poverty, moderate, very wealthy, right? It's not uniform across the deal. And that's the problem that we see in America is that it's democracy, but it's not all the gaps and that exist between the very poor and the very wealthy are so huge that people are starting to make movement to try to change that.
Yeah, when I think you got to look at it, you're looking at a macro scale. I think you got to go to the reverse. You said states, look at cities. Cities in California have completely different, codes that we abide by. You go even smaller down. You look at HOAs, homeowner association. They all operate completely different. So we almost have this, like Jose's saying, like, somebody puts this package together because they feel this is the core values, and if you don't like it, go to a different HOA. Right? If you don't like our city rules, go to a different city. And, you kind of grow up to the point where, like you said, like, okay, you don't like California's core values, go to Texas, which is what everybody's doing. They're just leaving the state because they don't believe in the core values, It's based off of what is best for that area. To Texas, their stance on, for instance, immigration is completely different than the California stance, So they have to have their rules basically able to enforce each one that they feel is the most valuable. And it's voter based. Obviously, because if Texas came in and their governor or their people came in and said, hey, look, let's be pro-immigration, they probably won't be elected the following time.
Right.
They have to go by the voters' wishes. So.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. And I think, obviously different perspectives, different everywhere. Like I like the HOA, the city, the county, the state, and you have the federal. And there's a lot of oversight, and and I just see that those variances, starting to become, starting to surface, and I feel like maybe not enough people realize that, right? It's like, over in South, down South, they do things like this. Well, this is why, right? And this is, and we're all in agreement, right, on it. We're voting these people in, and we're voting we're voting the people who are going to maintain what we have, right? And California is the same way, and yeah, so it's just it is a tricky situation. Ultimately, I think that in my opinion, for this subject, I think that I could agree on. I could see the understanding of guns are right, so it'd be pretty hard to take away from a elderly individual. I think that I'll give you that dub on that
Unless
one.
But it also says that you have to be competent.
Yeah,
you have to be competent. Well, that person is no longer competent. This is where it goes back to your case, is that you see a lot of cases that these mass shootings happen. There's something mentally not right there.
So if
so what I'm trying to get at is if you have someone that, just like a driver, forgive me, but if you're applying for a gun and you know that something's wrong mentally, should you be awarded a gun because it's your right? Right?
No.
But
right? And California says you have to go through this process.
Sure.
So, think
but should you be awarded your First Amendment? If you're mentally ill, should you say you've lost your First Amendment right? You're mentally ill, Jose. You can't write on the internet
Well,
anymore.
just like when you're getting into a contract, when you're getting into a contract in real estate, same thing. You have to be willing. You have to be competent. If you're someone that has, hold on, yeah. you're a citizen, but let's just say, this is nothing against anyone that has any physical challenge, but a mental challenge, for example, that they can't write a contract because they don't know what they're writing. Again, based on the evaluation that we got, Are they competent enough to go into contract? Are they competent enough to own a gun?
Okay, but a contract for a house is what? What constitutional right is that?
It's the right to be the right to happiness,
What-
pursue happiness.
I want constitutional right
I get
number.
it.
I'm just saying.
Okay,
like, that's
no worries. But I get it. But would you then agree then that anyone should be awarded a gun? That anybody has a run if you're a gun if you're a citizen?
I'll tell you what's scary. To agree, but to disagree. I'll tell you what's scary. They're pushing a law through that, like I'm trying to get you guys to understand. They're trying to push a law that says felons don't lose their Second Amendment right. Because again, just because you commit a crime, you cannot lose a right. You don't lose the right to your First Amendment. You shouldn't lose your right to your Second Amendment or any of the amendments. I'm not saying I'm in favor or I'm agreeing or disagreeing. I'm just saying this is something they're working towards because of the way they're kind of pushing back on the Second Amendment and how these are core values. So when you say should somebody have to jump through a hoop to own a gun, should that be the same thing for the First Amendment? Should you have to be a certain age to have the First Amendment? Or are you born with the First Amendment?
I'm trying to get the question answered. Should the gun be awarded to someone that's not competent? And what do you define as mentally ill or not there, right? So again, these are questions that when we wrote these amendments, that wasn't the initial thing at the time because the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, when they wrote that Second Amendment, it was for a well-regulated militia. It wasn't specific to that specific individual right that we have an argument. This is what the whole argument is today, and that's why the law has been, modified in some way to represent the individual. But back then, what was taking place? There was revolts happening within their own states. Sure. Washington had to come in and oppress that and take that away and said, hey, if we continue this route, we need to have a well-regulated militia to allow us to be able to fight this.
Sure.
And certain individual states, well, wait a minute. What's going to happen when my people have to go out and join Washington to go oppress another revolt somewhere? Who's going to protect us? From who? That's the question. History tells us that it was mainly the blacks. Yeah. They were afraid of the blacks revolting against the people that had the rights.
But they've ruled recently that every American has a right to self-defense also. Because this has to do with your CCWs and them trying to prohibit CCW.
But these are newer laws, right?
No, it's not newer laws. It's interpretations of the law that says that the second...
Interpretation. See, that's the key. Interpretations
because they wrote something generic, and we always have to figure out how to interpret it. But I'm trying to say that currently, this is why things are unraveling gun law-wise, is because currently they recognize that you as an individual have the right to self-protection inside and outside of your home. And that protection is getting recognized by the Second
and that
Amendment,
was the initial thought process when they wrote the
Second Amendment. I'm not the Supreme Court. That's how the Supreme Court.
I'm trying to put
yes.
a good context of what was taking place during that time, right? So that we understand that maybe at the time when they wrote these Bill of Rights, it didn't fit what's happening today.
Sure.
Just like the Constitution back then didn't really fit what's happening today.
I'll give you a better.
But we
example.
live by that. We live by that.
Pull it away from guns. Give you a good example. Religion. The Bible was written almost 2,000 years ago now, right?
I don't know.
Not written. I'm just saying.
I don't know.
Like 400 AD. Okay, I think 400. I got to go back to my history. But so 1,600 years ago, they wrote it. Till today, every religion still reads the same script, and they come to a newer understanding. We do that with religion. Why is it so odd that we're doing with the Second Amendment that something that was written 200 years ago, that we're going and saying, well, this is our understanding today of the same text from 200 years ago. If we do the same thing with the Bible, it's no different.
I don't think Jesus' names has changed in what he's done and everything that he did.
That's not true. The church every 10 to 15 years will come up and release new. It's not completely drastic. I mean, that's why it's always hilarious because they'll say well, now they're going to allow gays to be. It's no. It's minor details that they understand, formalities that they grow into, things that we may think words we say may be a little different because the language changes and our understanding changes. It's the same thing with the Second Amendment, any of the amendments. It's like I told you before, it's no different of why the First Amendment was you weren't protected on the internet. The internet wasn't around at the forefathers. But today, through interpretation, they say, yeah, of course, the internet has to be involved.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm trying to say. Like you can't pick and cherry pick and say, well, I like that. I like the First Amendment's protected on the internet, but I don't like that we can give more modern guns because that doesn't make sense. So
well, I think we're writing. That's a bonus already. We're going.
sorry, just
no.
the frustration.
I know. I
you
get
know,
it.
it's the frustration.
But you know what? I think what we can do is we can pick up on this because I think it's a good show, and I think we have a good topic on it, and I think it would be good for viewers to look at that again.
Comment, yeah.
Subscribe, comment if you. This is us just debating over what's taking place with current events, but at the end of the day, we're gonna go finish another coffee. And we'll talk about it again.
Yeah. No, I think that it's always good food for thought, right?
Yeah.
And these are some of the conversations that when you're driving driving to work or driving to wherever you go or in the shower, you're constantly thinking these things and you're having these debates, right? And you know, these are our opinions, but you know, we're not.
We're doing it for you.
Yeah,
This is
we're doing it for you.
Talking out loud, right?
Jargoning about. All right, cool. Well, fellas, well, thank you for that. We'll see how this whole deal with Mr. Ralph and Andrew transpire, and maybe we'll touch on it or give some follow up next week. So to Rohi's point, we don't just sweep it under the rug if something comes out about it. I'm sure we're going to do some research and come back with some facts next week, so we could continue to go after each other. All right, gentlemen. Well, this is the Weekly Jargon, and we look forward to your subscriptions, your messages, your comments, and of course your shares. Take care. Have a great week.
All right.